Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I want to do a review for you of this weird little knife, the ADV Mini-Butcher. The ADV Butcher is by Anders de Villiers, who I'm sure I just mispronounced his name, but he's a South African maker, and well, that's the ADV. And so, your little TAC-Butcher here, and this is one from 2015. I want to thank my buddy Francisco for sending this little knife along. He's been a big supporter of the channel, and I appreciate very much the chance to finally get to handle one of these. I handled a full size at the Blade HQ at one point in time, but never a mini, so this is neat. Let's do size comparison real quick. Here is your Spyderco Delica, and so in terms of blade length, they're in the same basic vicinity, and handle size, it's around there, although the Butcher's just a little bit thicker. Here is an Ontario Rat number 2, and an Ontario Rat number 1. So you can see the 2 is a much closer comparison in size all around. Let's see here. Anything else for compare? Well, what the heck? It's on the table here. Let's go ahead and compare with the Chris Reeve Knives Large Shabazz. So here is your Mini-Butcher. Here is your Maxi Shabazz. So anyways, there we go. One other thing I'm going to say is that Anders de Villiers, or Andre de Villiers, sorry, different person, has got, unfortunately, he's got some history going on. If you look in Blade forums, he's in their Hall of Shame. A lot of people have lodged a lot of complaints, mostly about customer service and some things like that. So do check that out before you make any purchases. I want to highlight that. But for the most part, though, I'm just going to focus on the knife. Maybe he's gotten better in the time since. I've not had any personal interactions with the guy. So there you go. Let's go ahead and move on to the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting little knife. So on the good side, first off, I do love a good Wharncliffe blade, and this is a good Wharncliffe blade. It's got a nice, a fair amount of, I don't even know how to put it, but it distributes pressure very nicely for drawing, pulling sort of cuts on this tip here. It's got a lot of support behind the tip, unlike some of your super crazy tactical Warnies where there's, you know, a really long point sticking out there. This is well supported all throughout, and frankly, I like this blade overall. It's got a really neat grind to it. You've got the ricasso up here, you've got this fuller, which we'll talk about later, but nonetheless, then you've got a swedge, which goes into this front portion. In some ways, it actually reminds me a little bit of the Insingo grind on the Shabazz here. But I really like the complexity of the grind here and the fact that it's done pretty precisely. I like very much the grind on this blade. That's neat. Speaking of the blade, the steel here is S35VN, which is a very nice steel. It's good to go. Absolutely 100%. Some other things that this knife has that are very nice. It has the cutest little over-travel stop ever. I don't know why I feel that way. I mean, surely there were knives with smaller ones, but this one just jumps out at me as kind of adorable. Just sitting there, I mean, relative to the pivot, everything else on this is big and aggressive, and then little tiny over-travels. It's adorable. So there you go. I think that's the first time anyone's ever called an over-travel stop adorable. But there's a first time for everything. It's also got a lock bar insert, which is not so adorable, but works just fine, and leads to a very stick-free, nice 50% lockup on this guy. So that's good too. The hardware on this guy, although it looks fancy over here, is just standard Torx, although we'll talk about a little bit of fancy, actually, right now. If we look inside here, and you'll see this in the disassembly video, but if we look inside, there's a little Allen screw, set screw, inside the female portion of the pivot. And what that basically allows you to do is set the depth of the female portion of the pivot, that is, so that the male portion can only go so deep, and so that when you crank it all the way down, it is at the optimal tightness. This is nice because it allows you to put it in adjustment once and then just be able to tweak it back together. Is it super necessary? Not particularly, in my opinion. You use a little Loctite of the blue variety and you're going to be fine. But it is interesting and it is different, so I want to give credit for that. That's something I've not seen before, and I've seen a lot. So that's kind of neat. Another thing I want to give credit for is the fact that he's dating his knives. I kind of prefer to see it on the inside of the knife overall, but, you know, it is a good thing to see. I always like that. You know, whether it's the birth card that comes with the Chris Reeve, the Grimsmo Norseman, or their knives have a date code on the inside of it. But it's fun to be able to watch a maker's work evolve over time, and having that right on there is kind of nice. So, anyways, and then there are just tons of details all over this knife. If you look, every square inch of this knife has got something going on from the feel of it. There's always more contouring, there's always more shapes, more geometry, more cutouts, more jimping. It's a really complicated and detail-full knife, and at some level, that's kind of a nice thing. It makes it very interesting, very different. Then finally, on the good side, I gotta say, I love the anodization of this backspacer here, as well as this pocket clip. It's got a very nice instantiation of a polished, the kind of blurple feel to it, where sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's purple, but it takes a knife that could otherwise be kind of angrily aggressive and turns it into something that's much more like, okay, that's really neat. So this anodization is really, really nicely done, and the fact that it's relatively polished and remains that way even when you've got oil on it from your hands is well done. I don't know what he's doing differently than some of the other anodizers out there, but it's nice. I like it a lot. And so that's what's good about this guy. It's got that great anodization. It's got tons of details, because there's detail all over this thing. I like the date, the pivot screw. I like the fact that he's using standard Torx hardware, even though it doesn't, look like it otherwise. I like the lock bar insert, the over travel stop, the steel, the blade looks great, and it's a nice warranty. Let's talk about what's great about this knife. The great part about this knife, absolutely 100%, is that it is unique. There is simply no other knife out there that looks like this knife. Any of his butcher-style knives, frankly, any of ADV's knives in general, have their own design DNA. These are not just another also-ran sort of flipper frame lock. They're not another, like, oh, who made that one? No, this is an ADV. You take one look at it, you know it's an ADV. And in fact, all of his products are a lot like that. His bigger butcher, he's even got a traditional style butcher that you take one look at it, you're like, oh yeah, it's an ADV. To an extent, like, Todd Begg has a similar feeling. Like, you take one look at a knife by Todd Begg, you're like, that's a Todd Begg. This guy's got that going on, and at a very real level, I respect the heck out of that, because it means that he has a vision and he's just running with it. And, whether it's to your taste or whether it's not, that's a beautiful thing, because it's a break out of the monoculture that can develop in an otherwise boring sort of knife world. So at that level, like I said, this guy is 100% absolutely unique and different and weird, and I respect the heck out of that. So that's what's great about this knife. There's nothing else out there that this is going to be comparable to. So on the bad side, actually, is something from the good side, and that is that every square inch of this knife has something going on. This knife is deeply rococo. Every bit of it is ornamented. I feel like, ADV just went over this over and over again to see, okay, is there something else I can do right here? Is there another little element I can add? It is the exact opposite of lazy, and I respect it in that way, but it's going to be a very love it or hate it sort of territory, because absolutely this knife comes across as busy in the hand. And, you can see it. Like, for instance, this little area right up here. On the side of the clip, he could have just made this a conventional clip, but instead he flattened it out and added this extra little jimping up there for whatever reason. This part clears the lanyard hole, which is nice, I suppose, but nonetheless, that kind of over-detailing is, well, pretty intense. And unfortunately, it leads to the next bad thing, which is the poor ergonomics. This little guy being a prime example of it. You put this guy in your hand, and although the basic idea of the ergonomics is fine, your finger goes here, and in my smaller hands it works well, there are hot spots all over the place. Because, this little area, this sharp corner here, this sharp corner here, this little area back here, as you're going to flip the knife, digs into your hand in a way that it doesn't really need to be. If that were a little bit more rounded, it would be, well, a little nicer. And, so overall, the knife, because of this over-ornamentation, is full of hot spots, and that makes it an ergonomic, well, it's not exactly a win. Next issue with this little guy is that it is relatively wide in the pocket at the top of the pocket. The jimping helps. I'm sorry, not the jimping, but the cant of the clip overall helps. It'll hang back a little bit, but the blade of this guy sits relatively shallow inside the frame here, and so at the very top of the knife, it's fairly wide. You're going to feel that a little bit in your pocket, but it's because of the smaller size, it's not as big a deal. But if you're looking at the big one, oh boy, does that get to be excessive. speaking of a little bit of thickness, this knife is a little bit thick in the blade. I mean, if we take a look at this blade here, it's not a very large knife, but the blade thickness is a little bit more so than the PM2, and this is already a relatively thick blade for its size. And unfortunately, it's also relatively thick behind the edge. I'll see if I can show you the sharpening choil, but it's a little wedgy. It's not the God's gift of slicing. Even with the looks to be hollow-ish. Maybe it's flat. I'm not entirely sure. But either way, even with this grind, it's not the world's best slicer. It does okay, but that is a problem. The groove on this guy is not a wonderful thing for me. I'm not a big fan of fullers on knives because it's kind of a crud groove. It collects crap in there, and, the last thing you cut is going to hang out in here. This one's not so deep. You can clean it out, but still, I don't tend to love those, especially when there's no need for it. This is just sort of a gratuitous fuller, and I don't love those in general. One thing that's commoner than I'd like to believe, and always a little bit unfortunate, is jimping right underneath the flipper tab. I mean, if we take a look here, we can see that the flipper tab is sitting in this little field of cutouts. And what this means is that every time you deploy the knife, and by the way, it is not a light switchy flipper. You can do a light switch motion, but it's not super reliable when you do it. This is really much more suited to a push button style. But every time you push that button, your finger dives down and lands this jimping pretty odd. And especially on a knife like this where you kind of want to preload the flipper action, that's not something that's a stellar experience. And given that even with my small hands, my thumb is not landing anywhere near this jimping, that feels a little unpleasant to me. I wish the jimping was on the blade rather than back here, where it hits your finger every time you hit the flipper tab. Then finally on this guy, on the bad side, the price on this guy is $450, or at least of comparable models. I didn't find this exact knife, but, other ones in this same run were around $450. And, well, this knife's got a lot going on. It's not lazy. There were a lot of details, so I don't think of it in terms of you being ripped off by it. That price is okay. I can see it. But the thing is, this is at its core an S35 VN and titanium frame lock. And so if you're looking for a functional knife, you can do a lot better, a lot cheaper. You're paying really good money there for something that is, well, you're paying a lot for the ornamentation. So that's a little bit on the bad side. It's not ugly, but it's a little on the bad side. The value is not super strong unless you're into all the extra stuff here. So that's the bad. You paid a lot of money, and a lot of that's going towards the extra stuff rather than the core. The flipper tab jimping is ugly. The crud groove, I don't love particularly. It's very thick behind the edge, a little wide in the pocket. And the ergonomics really take a back seat to this rococo over-designed sort of feeling. Let's talk about the real ugly of this knife. So on the ugly side, there are two issues. First off, it's got this thumb disc on there, and I tend to not like thumb discs because it's very easy for whatever you're cutting into to snag on that thumb disc. It's a flat surface, as opposed to a thumb stud where things can kind of go around the thumb stud, or at least split around it. The flat surface is just like a wall for whatever you're cutting into, so I don't like them as an opening mechanism in general. But the fact that there are thumb discs, there's a thumb disc on this knife alongside the flipper tab, I'm going to be honest, that's really ugly to me, because you've got a perfectly functional way of opening it up, so instead all this is really going to be doing is screwing up your cutting. So my very first step if I owned this knife would be trying to get this thumb disc off of the knife and just throwing it away, because that's a terrible choice in my personal opinion. The other issue for me on this knife is the detent. It is very soft. I mean, the knife is rather smooth, and it's running on needle bearings or roller bearings. I should have probably mentioned that in the good. That is different and unique about this knife. If you watch the disassembly video, you'll see that. But anyways, it's got a good action and whatnot, but the thing is the detent on this guy is very, very soft. And what this basically means is that it's relatively straightforward for you not to flip this guy properly, especially in some positions. I've got this guy oiled up and, tuned to perfection at the moment, but if it's not in tip-top shape, you're probably going to want to include some wrist. This was something I also noticed on the full-size one I handled, the Blade HQ. And so the detent on this guy is passable. It's not like, okay, send it back, it's defective. but it's not a satisfying detent whatsoever. I really feel like I'd like to see something a little bit harder that would give me a much more confident opening on this guy. This guy always feels like it's at risk of not opening, and so as I was carrying it, I was always giving it a little bit of extra wrist just to make sure. So that's, to me, very ugly. On a $450 small batch production sort of knife, you need to get the detent right, even if you're spending good time on the action and whatnot. So that's your ugly right there. The detent is just honestly too soft, and the thumb disc is absolutely brutally ugly on a knife that's got to flip a tab already. So let's jump into your final verdict here. I look at this knife as being a tactical peacock. That's right, a peacock, like the bird with the big feathers that shows off. You'll see him out and about sometime every so often. Every square inch of this knife is ornamented. I mean, it's even the color of a peacock. Come on now. But every square inch of this knife is ornamented. It's rococo. You look at it and it's just like, oh my God, there's a lot of details here. And it contains, honestly, every tactical knife design element and trope out there. I mean, ranging from your over travel, your lock bar insert, your roller bearings, your fancy pivot, anodization, jimp. I mean, it's got everything built into this. And so even though this is a relatively small knife, it is absolutely over the top, and it screams a loud and artsy tactical statement to the world. It is a showy knife even at this size. And, this makes for the knife being absolutely unique and different. And as I've said previously, I respect ADV for going there. This is far from lazy. He went way into it to make this knife. But the thing is, much like with a regular peacock, all of that ornateness comes at a practical price. If you watch a peacock running around, it's a little bit awkward, and flying even more so. And in this case, for all those extra feathers, so to speak, you're paying in a few ways. You're paying with a subpar action relative to some of your other knives in this same price range. You're paying with poor ergonomics caused directly by some of those details. You're paying in an overall functional utility. It's an overly thick blade, which makes it not God's gift to cutting, and, well, you're paying in cold hard cash because, well, like I said, $450 is a lot of money for a, sort of S35 VN titanium frame lock. And so I look at the ADV Mini-Butcher as a very peculiar form of tactical knife-making art. And that's the way this is best looked at. It cuts things. It's fine as a pocket knife, but if you really love the look and you love the idea and you love this screaming, loud design of it, then by all means, check it out. It's a fine knife in that way. But if you make that choice, you just need to know that you're trading a little bit of practical knife for this tactical peacock sort of arty look for it. So, I guess that's where I land on it. I don't know that I recommend it as a pocket knife, but if it appeals to you strongly enough as art, well, you might consider it. So, there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, that you enjoyed seeing this little peacock's feathers, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. And, hey, Andre, sorry I butchered your name. I was saving that one. Bye, everybody.